All right, we are going to be speaking with someone in Tumbler Ridge in our next segment, but right now the investigation into the mass shooting in BC is focused on the why. What motivated an 18-year-old to go on a shooting spree that killed 9 people, including her mother? RCMP offered this yesterday when speaking with reporters.
Police had attended that residence on multiple occasions over the past several years, dealing with concerns of mental health with respect to our suspect. I can say that on different occasions, the suspect was apprehended for assessment and follow-up.
British Columbia RCMP have identified 18-year-old Jesse Van Rooselaar as the shooter. For a closer look at this investigation today, I'm joined by Mark Mendelson, former homicide detective in the city of Toronto. Good to have you here. Sorry about the circumstances. We're going to talk about investigation. What are RCMP focusing on as they look for motive in this mass killing?
Well, you brought up the question in the intro. We know everything but the why. So now this is where the investigation is focused. So what the police are doing is, of course, they're interviewing everybody at the school, because there are witnesses who actually saw what happened. They're going to try and determine whether these victims were targeted or whether the shooter came in and just randomly opened fire indiscriminately. And if they were targeted, why were they targeted? So there's also going to be search warrants and production orders related to both the shooter and the family, their smartphones, their computers, their desktops, to see if there was any interaction. Were they on any blogs, any social media sites? Were they being goaded into doing this action? That's not unheard of. There's people all over the world that encourage people to go out and do these things. So they'll be looking at all those things in terms of a motive. The sideline that came up, of course, is the firearms. We know that the firearms, at one time, some of them were legally registered to somebody in that house. Yeah. We don't know if it's the shooter or her mother or a stepfather. We just don't know. Yeah. So they'll be looking at that. And why were those guns returned? Which is also a question that was brought up yesterday by the RCMP. Right,
and my understanding, clarify this if I'm wrong, but from the RCMP is that the request had been made because of the mental health calls that those weapons be removed, even though they were registered weapons, from the home, and then someone had petitioned to have them put back in the home.
Right, so the question will be, who was the lawful owner at the time? Was it the mother, or was it somebody else in the house? And what efforts and what explanations were given to get those guns back? So they'll be looking at that. They'll be looking at the guns that were used. We still don't know if the firearms used in this offense were those guns that were returned. So they'll be looking at the provenance of those weapons. Are they lawfully obtained? Where did they come from? When were they purchased? And that's going to be a big focus of this investigation as well.
Why
then the
focus
mental
on
health part.
Yeah, why focus on the weapons?
Well, because they want to know, it's all going to form part of the narrative at the end of the day. Why were the guns taken away in the first place? Under the Mental Health Act, maybe? How were they returned? What were the circumstances? And if those are not the same weapons, then where were those weapons accessed through?
When you're dealing with minors as eyewitnesses, as we will be in this case, that high school, which isn't typical, it is a small town, so that high school went from grade 7 to grade 12. Yeah. So in some cases, you're dealing with interviewing minors and getting statements from minors. How does that change the process for investigators? Are parents then involved as part of the interviews?
Absolutely. Parents, when you're dealing with young persons, parents are always invited to be part of the interview. Certainly, in my experience with homicide, you ask the parents not to say anything. Be there, be a support person. But you're not being interviewed. We want the pure version of the witness. And that's, so you have to deal with children, younger persons in a very different way.
Well, that's my question, is that a lot of these are 12 and 13-year-olds. They're closer to being kids than they are to being teens.
Absolutely. So you have to handle them in a very different way than you would an adult. But they're still human beings, and they still know what they saw and what they heard. And it's a matter of how do you extract that information from them? Because that's what the police are going to want to know. Were these other kids targeted? Because the kids that have been killed and wounded, aside from the teacher, are of a much younger age than the shooter. So was there a relationship at all between the shooter and these kids?
There's a reason that not all information is released all at once in these investigations, and it is part of putting this together, the most accurate answer to this motive question. But there's a lot of, I saw yesterday, there's a lot of, when there's a void of information, people rush to fill it. A lot of content creators putting out theories. And when you're dealing with young people who deal primarily in social media, both for information and communication, what challenges does that pose?
That is a huge problem for investigators. You very correctly say that there's this massive amount of misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories all flying out there, from people in Europe who know nothing about this at all. But, you know, with the protection of anonymity, people can say anything they want online. And what you're concerned about are kids absorbing that. And all of a sudden, they're taking, you know, bits and pieces of what they're seeing online, which may be factually completely incorrect, and weaving it into the narrative of what really did happen. So that's why it's important for the police to get on these kids, to start interviewing them as soon as possible before they can be tainted, if you will, in terms of their memory and their recollection.
Well, that was why I was wondering about that challenge for you. Listen, I appreciate you coming in today, Mark, and sharing your experience as you take a look at this case, along with the rest of the country, and grieve for the families who are going through what they're going through there.
My pleasure, Anne.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.